All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Data Plus Women Virtual. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I'm very excited for this day. I see that I have the wrong date here on the starting slide, but please never mind that. Who are we? Who is Data Plus Women Germany? So Data Plus Women Germany is co-led by myself, Heidi Kalber, as well as my two friends, Gina Konietzki and Corinna Müller. Together we founded Data Plus Women last year, and we want to use this platform to give people an opportunity to learn and network in the area of data analytics. We also want to use this platform to unite people of any gender to promote diversity in the data community. And not just gender, but also people of any age, any ethnicity, any technical or academic background. And since we're going virtual, wherever you are in the world, so even outside Germany, obviously. We are having at least quarterly meetings. This is, I think, our 7th meeting of the year. And at the end of today, I will definitely tell you the next 2 meetings that we have already scheduled. For anybody struggling with the title of Data Plus Women, I like to quote Emily Kuhn, and she said, it's data plus women. It's not data minus men. So as I said, we try to be inclusive of everyone. Diversity is a discussion where everyone should be involved. So if you have any friends of any gender who should definitely hear our message, please bring them to the next meeting and feel free to forward this. What do we have planned today? Today we have Alison Holland joining us, and she will talk about quantifying user feedback, how text mining helped her become a better listener to her users. So very excited about that. After Alison's talk, we will have a brief Q&A session where you can ask any questions that you have. So please use the Q&A feature. If you drop your questions in the chat, they might vanish a bit, so please use the Q&A feature for that. And at the end, we will have a number of announcements. As I promised, you will get to know the next dates and topics for the next few meetings. And if you like, you can stick around for some networking. No worries, this session is being recorded, so you can definitely watch it again later. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to Alison. Over to you.
Hi Heidi, thank you very much. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so that should be visible now. I hope you can see the quantifying user feedback slide.
Yeah, looks good.
Great, awesome. So hi everyone, it's a pleasure to talk to you all today. I'm afraid I have to leave my camera off because I've had some really weird internet connection issues. So I'm afraid I'm just going to be a voice today. But I'm really excited to talk to you about quantifying user feedback and how text mining helps me become a better listener to my users. So I'll just talk a little bit about me first. So I am actually a user researcher. I currently work for a company called Amboss, which is an e-learning medical company where we help medical students pass their exams and become awesome physicians. And prior to that, I actually worked in a gaming company called Game Duo, and that's where I first got into text mining. And I a UX storyteller and an R fanatic. I love like basically telling stories to the team to try and like teach them about the user, who the users are, and I love using R. It's like a great tool and language. It was actually my first coding language, so yeah, I'm totally biased. And just regarding my education background, I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in neuroscience, and it was actually during my master's in neuroscience that I started using R. And I will be honest, it was a very bumpy road at the beginning because I'd never coded before, but with like a lot of like attention to detail and a lot of like going on Stack Overflow, I actually managed to do my whole master's thesis with R, and I did it in 6 months. So I was pretty proud of that in the end. And that's why I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how R, I used R when applying it into being a user researcher. So I'm going to already jump forward into my first job as a user researcher at the gaming company. So this is Game Duel, like one of our marketing banners, and yeah, it was a really fun place to work at because it was involved a lot of playing games and talking to our users about playing games. And one of my first projects was like surveying our users who were on our platform and finding out how they were playing and how they felt about our 35 games. And these games ranged from card games to match 3 games to like lots of different ones. We had like lots of variations and a huge user base. So my task was to figure out things about performance, loading time, readability, and generally our users' overall experience of these 35 games. So in order to quantify this, I sent out a survey, and it basically included 5 rating questions. So it was like, okay, how would you rate the performance of this game? How would you rate the loading time, and so forth. And then it also included 4 comment field questions, which is where we asked our users to tell us a little bit why they gave it that rating. And we sent this out to approximately 400 users per survey. Now, whoever has done surveys before, we know that like the return rate is not always 100%. Sometimes it's 50%, sometimes it's 25%. But still, it's a lot of surveys that went out and a lot of comments that came back. So when I first started analyzing the surveys, the rating scales were actually pretty easy. And my colleagues used to say, oh, those are some pretty graphs there, which was really cool because it was a really nice way to visualize like, okay, this is how our users are rating our games. This is how this is changing between the games of like a similar genre or variations of, say, solitaire. And this was pretty easy to do in R. But when I looked at the comments, I got about 100 comments per question, which ended up about 400 comments per survey. And when I calculated that up recently, it was about 14,000 comments from the 35 surveys. And that is a little bit daunting because the way I was analyzing them was not through R at the time. I was literally tagging each of these comments, and it took about 2 to 3 days per survey. I was literally reading every single comment and tagging this as like, okay, this is specifically to do with this loading part or to do with this performance part in this game, or this is a positive comment, this is a negative comment. And my problem was that when I started compared to where I ended, the tagging was not very accurate and it was not consistent because I improved my tagging over time, which meant that at the beginning it wasn't so great, or it was kind of basic, and then it became more and more detailed. So that wasn't so great. I also found that I was losing a lot of context when I was tagging this because I needed to like calculate like the frequency of these comments that were related to that tag. And sometimes these comments would talk about multiple things and sometimes they would talk about like one thing. So a lot of the context kind of went away of like, okay, what is this comment actually saying? I also found myself like losing a lot of time, and this also created a problem of like how to really analyze these insights. So that had to like be limited as well. So it wasn't really the best method. And although we did like a very good job, I felt like that this tagging and analyzing comments just really took far too long, and I wasn't getting as much out of it as I should have done. So me and my colleagues like decided to sit down and we were like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And we came across this text mining with R by Julia Silger and David Robinson. And I was so excited about this that I spent like the whole month of January, like in 2019, going through this whole thing. And it was really cool because it used examples like Jane Austen and like the Gutenberger collection and NASA. So I really went to town on this and had a really fun time just like going through the whole code and really getting a better understanding of like how you can do text mining in R and what it actually shows. So I'm going to talk about some of these methods right now that I feel were really beneficial. And unfortunately, I can't use the data that we talked about in the customers, with the customers, but I'll just use this Jane Austen example so that you get a feel for like how the text mining was done. So the first method was very basic. It was just looking at the word frequency. Now, the packages that are used in R, they actually filter out these unimportant words, such as like as, is, the, these words occur a lot and they're not very important. They don't have any context or like understanding of what's going on. So R filters out like the unimportant words and you're left with these really interesting words such as like miss and time and dear and lady and sir and day and Emma and sister. So you're already getting a sense of like, okay, these are the most common words that are occurring in this Jane Austen collection. And you can then make pretty graphs out of it, which I quite like doing. I personally preferred making a bar graph out of it because I could actually like see the differences much better than the word cloud, but quite a few of my team members who weren't so up on the whole like numbers and counting and stuff quite liked the visualization of the word cloud. And that was really cool. What was really cool about these packages is that there were multiple ways to visualize the most frequently occurring words in these collections. The next thing we looked at was the relationships between words, and this is where you're looking at like how these pairs of words like appear in the text without the unimportant words. So when we had a look at these pairs of words, we could see that a lot of the characters came up. So like Sir Thomas, Miss Crawford, Captain Wentworth, Miss Woodhouse, Frank Churchill, and so forth. So unsurprisingly, characters are very important in Jane Austen. But what we could also do is have a look at the correlations. And this was literally looking at like the different words that were like most frequently correlated. And this is where it brought out different like results where you not only saw the characters, but you also saw that like money was important in this as well. And again, you could also visualize the words that were mostly associated. So you could actually pick a certain word out. So for instance, married, and you could see that in this top right graph that married was also associated with Lydia and daughter and dear and so forth. So this was like a really cool way to see like, okay, these words are associated with these words and are correlated far more often than others. The next thing I looked at was what's called this term frequency inverse document frequency. And this is just a fancy way of saying like, what is the word frequency that's specifically important in each of these books? And the way it calculates it is it decreases the weight of the most commonly used words like overall, and it increases the weight for the words that are not used very much in Jane Austen's novels as a whole. So you end up getting like this very nice graph, and it's kind of small, but basically the characters were still very important in each of these novels, but it showed which characters were actually important between the novels as well. So it gave you a much clearer picture. And in other words, we basically found the words that are most important in a text, but are not too common. That was like the biggest takeaway from this. The next thing we had a look at was the sentiment analysis, and the guide actually does this in 3 different ways. There are a few other ways to conduct sentiment analysis, but just to like go through the basics, we'll start with this one. So the first one that it goes through is looking at the valence, so negative and positive words. And the R package already provides a library where it already defines like certain words as either positive or negative. So you don't have to like worry about like coding these yourself, it's already there. And you can also like go one step further where not only can you have positive and negative, but you can actually categorize them as well into things like joy and trust and fear, sadness, anger, and so forth. So you're actually putting like more empathy and emotion into these words. And then the last one, which is the one that I tended to use the most, was where you actually created a score. And this score went from -5 to 5, with -5 to 0 being like negative and 0 to 5 being positive. So you could understand a little bit more about like how negative or how positive this sentiment around this word actually was. And this worked really well because it just kind of gave us this nice scale compared to like having these categorical like namings, and this is why we ended up using this one the most. But one thing we needed to consider was these negating words, and these are words like not or no or without and never. And what happens is, like, if these words are placed before a word, you need to be aware that like this will totally change the sentiment. So for instance, if somebody said loved, you know, I loved him, versus I did not love him, this completely changes the sentiment. And R does this really well by like basically pointing out, okay, these are the pairs of words that have a negating word before the actual word, and these are the ones that we need to make sure are not coded incorrectly when doing the sentiment analysis. So they really thought about quite a few stages and like how language is processed in order to quantify this. And I really, really liked that, and it was super helpful. So, but one of the problems that I came across when I'd gone through this whole guide was that Jane Austen novels are, they're books, and they are about characters and passion and a lot of events happening and story, and hopefully very few typos. Compared to our user feedback, which is usually short sentences, it's incredibly subjective, and our users aren't always the best spellers. They use abbreviations, they use emojis, they can sometimes be sarcastic. So applying like the methods that I'd used in Jane Austen and our user feedback, I was a little bit like, I'm not sure how this will work very well. So just to give you an overview of how well this actually did work, I basically just wrote down here like the different analysis techniques and how well it actually worked. So I first started small by looking at the word frequency, and I first looked at like one comment box in one survey, and I did a frequency analysis looking at the number of most common words. And this actually worked surprisingly well. Because it was just like calculating everything up, and I was like, okay, great, this is actually better than tagging, because I'm actually using the words that are coming up rather than like taking the words and putting my own interpretation of it. And then I looked at the relationships between the words, and this also worked really well because, again, I could look at the correlations, I could look at the pairings, and I could see like which were the most frequently occurring ones, and also like I could take a word like fun or challenging, and I could see which words were actually associated with that. Next, I looked at this term frequency inverse document frequency, or as I like to call it, the word frequency inverse rating, where I was looking at like how common words were occurring per rating. And this didn't work so well. And the reason was because the number of data, or the number of words, like was too small to actually create anything meaningful. I ended up getting like these graphs with these great big bars, like it would be 3 bars, and it's just like, yeah, this is not really a good analysis at all. So that didn't work so well. But it was good because I could still focus my attention on the certain words and see how important these words were coming up and what context they were in. And that also meant that I could have a look at the sentiment analysis. And that did work pretty well at first, but we did have like some very specific words in there that we wanted to decide by ourselves, like what kind of sentiment that would have. So for instance, in our dictionaries, the word robot or bot was either not there, or it was classified as a neutral like sentiment. And in our games, we tend to not have these robots or bots. We tend to like have players playing against each other. Yet it was always like a really common feedback from our users saying like, oh, I lost this game is rigged, you're saying that there's no bots, but there is. So we wanted to make the word bot and robot negative. Because we knew that that was like always going to be associated with like something negative. And we also made the word challenge or challenging. We made this from a negative sentiment into a positive sentiment. And the reason was because we noticed that like in our comments, people were actually saying like how great challenging was, like, and challenging the game was. But it didn't really work very well the first time around because like occasionally we'd get the odd user saying that challenging and it was actually not a great thing. So we ended up making the word challenging from a negative sentiment into a neutral sentiment. And that also made like the whole sentence a lot more like easier to understand, because it was then focusing on the other words and not so much on challenging. And it like got to the point where we were figuring that this is actually really working well. So me and my team lead decided that we wanted to like apply these methods to all of our games. So we decided to set up this standardized survey, which meant that it was a survey that went round to our users every quarter, and it had the same questions, and we could measure the responses over time. And this worked really, really well, because we got to see like how many times the word like fun came up and how this changed depending on like what updates were released. And we got to see like as well that like when we sent the survey around the first time, certain words were not included, but like when we sent it around the second time, third time, fourth time, more words were included as like being important. And that was really interesting, because it really did depend on like the time of year, the demographic, the type of player that we were marketing to, and we could see all of these different patterns, and it was really working very well. And we also managed to, because we were gathering more data, we managed to actually look at this word frequency inverse rating, and it was the analysis results were getting more and more accurate as time went on. So all in all, it was a really good experience, and all these steps worked very well in the end. So how did text mining actually make me a better listener? Well, text mining benefits, there's a lot of benefits. For starters, you're not doing tagging anymore, so you're not losing any context. You're actually looking at the user's words for what they are. And there's also like a lot less time pressure. It was so much easier to run this analysis on the surveys and not feel like I had no time to do anything else. It was a lot easier to see the results and then have a look at the rest of the survey and the other surveys as well, and draw better insights. And we were able to quantify the responses in different ways. So like we started out with these 35 games, and then we had a look at like the standardized survey for like different games, and so we were getting like a more complete picture of who our users are and like how they write and what they write. We were also able to see like much better the differences between segments, so not just like the ratings, but we had to look at like between the questions, between like each of the surveys, each of the games. We were able to group certain games together, compare them to other games, and then also analyze within that group of games as well. Visualizing the data was so much easier for the team to understand why we like decided on certain things, because they could see that certain words were popping up at a certain update that was done, and why this was like a good thing or not so good thing, and why we needed to change. And it literally saved me hours. I went from taking 2 to 3 days to quantify like one survey to a few hours quantifying like multiple surveys. So it was really, really good. And I felt so much less like, well, I felt more that I was giving the user a voice, and that I could teach like the team more about like what the users were actually saying and what was important. But there are still some issues with text mining. So as I mentioned, like the feedback from users is very subjective and it's in written form. And text mining doesn't yet understand like sarcastic comments or spelling mistakes or certain phrasing or emojis. So this was also involved like a little bit of tagging still, but it went from like tagging, you know, these 14,000 comments or like 100 comments per question to tagging maybe like 10 comments per survey. So it really brought that down, which was really good. Not every sentence is read, literally. Before I was reading every single sentence and tagging it, and now I let R do this, and I focus on like the sentences that are coming up, like depending on like word frequency and the correlations and sentiment and so forth. So I'm not actually reading every sentence anymore, but it is still way more accurate because you do get fatigued when you're reading all this feedback, you do miss things, and you are under a certain amount of time to do all this. So it's an issue that's like worth it, shall we say. Even though I was saving more time, the preparation now takes a little bit more time. So what I started doing was, after I got like say 50 responses or so, I would already download that data and then I would prepare the code. I would reuse quite a lot of it. It was mainly changes if it happened to be like a different language, or if it had like an extra question in it or something like that. So that took a little bit more time, but at the end I was still saving a ton. And when you get the data in, the team wants the results as soon as possible, so that was totally fine. The last point is just that text mining, especially in R, is not yet a well-known technique. A lot of people are still doing tagging by hand, and it's also like there's some programs that are using like text mining techniques and natural language processing, but it's still really in development. So when I had like any issues, it was actually quite hard to find like information on this because it's not very well known. But nevertheless, I would like to encourage you all, especially our users, to try this out for yourself and let me know how it goes. I had a really good time learning all about this and understanding like a lot more how R works and about like statistical analyses, and also how like I can understand and listen to my users more. And I would love to hear your feedback if you do try it out. It would be really cool to see like how what analyses you pick from this guide, what other analyses you discover, and yeah. I would really like to hear that from you. So yeah, I guess I finished on time. Thank you for listening today, and do you have any questions? I already see there's a question up there. How can beginner and novice R coders get into this? Is the code available somewhere to try out? So when I was trying out the first time, I literally was going through a PDF which was very related to my sorry, I was just reading the Heidi Carver would like to answer this question live. I'm not quite sure how this means, but yeah, there are a lot of resources out there. So like I said, I was first looking at like this PDF, but that was very specific to the analysis that I was doing for my master's. However, what really helped me was DataCamp and trying out like a lot of these packages like Proton. That's a really cool package. And so when I kind of got the basics and understanding like how coding works, then I started going through like more complicated packages like text mining in R. But I would say like definitely try out some beginner coding like on DataCamp. Also Code Academy might have it now, because the problem is that you need to understand this abstract thinking, and once you've got that, coding becomes a lot easier, but before that it's not so easy. So that would definitely be my advice, and you can always message me and I can give you some resources to try out, and if you have any questions on text mining, feel free to get in contact.
All right, thanks so much. I think that were all of the questions from the audience. Audience, please feel free to ask more questions because I have a number. Oh yeah, So Josh Wilson asked, how did you visualize your results? Did you use Tableau to visualize them?
No, I actually just used R completely at first, and we were, because we didn't have Tableau where I was working, we used Power BI. So we eventually took the R code and actually integrated it into that. And that made it actually really cool and dynamic, because we could basically create this dashboard, and then it went, we sent it around to the team so they could go around and like start interacting with the different graphs and seeing how the graphs changed the text, like the frequency of words and the word cloud and so forth. I'm not sure if you can do it in Tableau. I'm sure there's some forums out there that are talking about it, so yeah.
All right, great. And Louisa asks, did your stakeholders in the company find the resulting analysis easy to understand and drive changes to the product?
So we started out small. We started out just having a look at, like, when we started doing the full text mining and doing the standardized survey, we did it on one game. We also kept it like super secret, which didn't work out in the end. Like, more and more people were like, so what are you working on? And it started like, I guess, taking prominence when instead of saying like, oh, we found this percentage did this and this percentage did that, we instead started showing graphs which showed like frequency of the words. And it was actually when our CEO, who's really into data and loves doing like product analytics, was asking like, are these like words from actual like users? And we were like, yeah, this is these are actual quotes that we're mining, we're actually doing the text mining. And then he got interested in it. And yeah, so it was kind of like a bit of a word of mouth in a way. And it was driving changes to the product when we were pairing it with the product analytics team. So it did help, definitely. It did help because we could understand our users better, and it was fitting more with what we were seeing in the data.
All right, and we have some more requests for any tips or suggestions on any books that could help in mastering R. Anything like for R in general that you can recommend?
I can. It really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing user research, there's actually a really great book called Quantifying the UX, and they have a website called Measuring You. I can totally send around all of this later. And that was really great for a user researcher like me, because with user research, it does overlap a lot with psychology, and it did have a lot of methods in there that was psychology testing, statistical analysis, stuff like that. And you could basically load a lot of the functions and then just plug in your data. And I went one further, where I actually started creating kind of like variables and things, where it was like, okay, if this variable is the confidence interval and so forth, then it basically created this really cool like analysis, which I could say, okay, this is how confident we are that this is like actually going to represent our population. For other things, yeah, it really depends, but I can totally yeah, if you contact me afterwards, then I can totally give you some tips for sure. It just depends what you want to know.
So if you have some general books or like resources that you can recommend, feel free to pop them over to me afterwards, and I'll include them in the follow-up email. And cool. Maybe you can share how people can contact you outside of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll send my LinkedIn. That's the best way to contact me. So.
All right, perfect. So I'll include that in the follow-up email as well, so everybody can ask Alison specific questions. All right, one more question from Jan. Are you including more free-form text in your questionnaires now that you have a better handle on analyzing them?
It really depends on what we want to know. So I'm just trying to think, because it's been a little bit of a while since I did this. But yeah, when we started doing the standardized survey, we did only include like 3 like common field questions, because we wanted to keep it like super general. But we did actually start, like when we were doing more kind of like diary studies or like longitudinal studies, we did start including more like free form text, and that was really, yeah, it took more data, like text mining, but we felt that it was okay because we had the time to do it, and we felt that it was beneficial in the long run. But it really depends what your question is, because I wouldn't say that like text mining replaces rating scales and stuff like that, because it's better to use it in together, essentially, and then analyze it for sure.
Right, great. And Louisa has another question. How did you deploy your code or your model? Did you get to that stage, or was it run on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, deployed my code. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. Do you mean like per project, or maybe? Sorry, Louisa, you could emphasize on that a little bit more, or maybe Heidi, you know, or.
I'm assuming that maybe the question is like, did you have a standard code, or did you have to like remodel the code for every questionnaire that you did?
I see. Sorry, end of day. Yeah, so it really depended on the survey. So when it was the standardized survey, we just used the same code each time. And that was really easy. When we like had a specific survey where we had like completely new questions, then we adapted it a little bit. But it really depended on what it was that we were asking, because sometimes it was useful to kind of like compare two comment fields, or maybe even three, just because it was like kind of like a following on question, if that makes sense. So okay, like you did a bunch of like selections, and then it was like, okay, what did you do first, what happens next, and why is this important, kind of thing. Then we would adapt it. But I think that's like something that probably needs to be a bit more thought out, because we don't want to create too much noise, and we only did it with a maximum of like 3 comment fields. But I think it's something that we can maybe like develop further. I just haven't figured out a way yet, but it's a good question. Thank you. You've got me thinking now.
Okay, I had another question. So how you mentioned that you did have to tag some comments manually at the end, even though you did the text analysis. So how did you determine which comments needed to be tagged manually?
It mainly was like if it was like a high frequency of words, and then we got like, say, like those 20 comments, and I'd usually just kind of like skim them through, because it kind of made sense like what they were saying, because it was all very similar. But then you would get one person, and this particularly worked with sarcasm, where you could just tell that, yeah, okay, this person is really annoyed because they've lost like a lot of games in a row, and they just want to rant. And I would just basically kind of like go into art and like kind of remove that comment in that particular word frequency, as like, okay, he's clearly not having a good time. He clearly doesn't love the game. So it would be like, oh, I love this game. The robots win every time. Yeah, I'm so glad that I'm spending so much money on this game. It's like, okay, yeah, okay, not happy, negative. But we did still use it, because other words would come up frequently that were associated with other negative comments and so forth. But it was really like a lot easier to kind of like group those comments together and see them for what they were, and then be able to like filter out the odd ones. One comment that I remember coming up was when somebody was actually really happy with our game, that they just said like, I love the game, especially the emojis, and just copied and pasted it 10 times. So we had to, like, when we noticed this, because we were kind of surprised that emojis came up like 10 times because we hadn't done anything to them, we decided to like kind of just make that comment like, okay, we'll just take that one sentence, filter out the repetitiveness. They love the emojis.
All right, and another question. You mentioned that not every comment was read, which was one of the downsides of using text mining versus manual reading, even though text mining in R is time-saving. Was there any data that might have been missed, and how accurate was the outcome?
I am sure that some data was missed, but because there is always a certain amount of like inaccuracy, right? But it wasn't human like mistakes, shall we say, because I was like really trying to churn through all of these comments, like especially, you know, I would start out like really focused and, you know, okay, I'm reading everything, and by the end of the second day I was completely done and just like not even really being able to kind of process what the users were saying. So it was definitely more accurate because R doesn't get tired, you know, like it treats like the frequency of a word as a frequency of a word. It treats the pairings as pairings, no matter what time of day you're at. And it also like included always like the context around that word, which I really liked. And it just really made me able to focus on certain things far better. So because sometimes I don't know, I don't think I mentioned this, but sometimes we would get a comment where the user was really like, regardless of whether it was a good, like a positive one or a negative one, they were like the loudest voice in the room. And we would sometimes get so fixated on that loud voice because they used capitals, or because they wrote like 10 sentences, or because they talked about money. And I wanted to like not have that when I was teaching the team about the users. I didn't want them to focus on one user. I wanted to have a look at everybody objectively. So I think that's how the accuracy came into it as well. That we weren't just kind of like focusing on that one user that was like kind of screaming.
All right. And did you manage to find a way to treat typos? You mentioned that those might have been a problem.
Yeah, we did. So the text mining packages that they suggest actually have like a few ways to like get rid of abbreviations and separate out words. And sometimes like we would also like look at certain words that were kind of similar. So when we were like kind of filtering out, okay, I want to know like what words this is associated with. So like sometimes our users would write monies like with a Z at the end, or so when we were looking at like the word money, we would kind of include those variations as well. But they would kind of come under the same word, it was just like spelled differently. Another example would be like American English and British English, for instance, or like German language in Germany versus Austria versus Switzerland. There's always variations in that, but if we knew what the variations were, we could group those words together to be like, okay, this is the word that we're looking at and that we're interested in, and these are the variations that we want to have a look at and how they are associated.
That's cool. So Michael is asking, in terms of diversity, is there anything that you learned about natural language that can be used to increase diversity, or that can be used to help to promote it?
I think we did actually, and it was actually a lot to do with how we visualized the data in terms of the in the standardized survey, because we did ask like quite a few demographic questions, and that was really interesting because in some of our games we had more women, and in some of our games we had more men. In others it was like they tended to be like 45 plus, so the age didn't really vary that much. But what was interesting was the words that were associated in that particular age group between those two genders. We had very rarely like different genders that we have now because of the age group, but looking at those was really interesting and cool. And you could also associate like the type of player as well. Like, so if we had like competitive players versus players that were more into kind of like the social aspects in the sense of like playing with friends or family, you could just see the different associations there. And yeah, I mean, like we did talk to our like CRM teams about it as well, but we kind of felt that we wanted to get more data before like really even tailoring it to that point. And I actually don't quite know where it went after that, because at that point I got a different job. But we did already like come like touch on those points for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So we don't have any further questions yet. So again, thank you so much for your session. That was really interesting. I think, as we definitely saw from the number of questions, we haven't had this many questions in a while. So thank you so much. Everyone, please feel free to stick around because I would like to announce our next 2 meetings. So we have another Data Plus Women event coming up on Tuesday, November 3rd, so in just a couple of weeks. And we will have our own Corinna Müller talking at that event. The specific topic isn't set yet, but we are looking at something in the area of SQL. So if you're interested in another technical event, please feel free, please do join us on November 3rd, and please remember to bring a friend. And I'm very excited to announce our Christmas special. So on Tuesday, December 1st, and yes, it's already time to think about Christmas, we are bringing together not only Data Plus Women Germany, but also Data Plus Women Amsterdam, London, Zurich, Romandie, Luxembourg, and probably a number of others. So we will have a big European Data Plus Women special event for you. I can't announce much more than that yet, but please already sign up for the event. There will definitely be more information about that coming out soon. And I'm very much looking forward to that, and I hope to see many of you there. So that was basically it for today. I will stop recording in a second. For anyone who wants to stick around to network or to ask Alison any last minute questions, please do that. As I said, I'll stop recording in a second, and after that I will make everybody speakers so that you can unmute yourselves and maybe share your video and just get in touch with everybody else who's attending. For anybody wanting to drop out, thank you for attending today. Thank you again for Alison, and I hope to see you all on November 3rd and or Tuesday, December 1st. Thank you so much.